Imagine opening a book that's more than 600 years old, only to realize nobody on Earth can read a single word inside it. Picture a man hijacking a passenger plane. He calmly collects a fortune in cash. Then he jumps into a freezing storm with nothing but a parachute and is never seen again. Or imagine finding a ship drifting across the Atlantic Ocean. The cargo is still there. The food is untouched. The crew's belongings are exactly where they left them. But every person on board is gone. These aren't scenes from a movie. They really happened. You'd think that with DNA profiling, satellite technology, artificial intelligence, and modern forensic science, mysteries like these would have been solved years ago. After all, we've identified people from tiny strands of DNA. We've uncovered ancient cities buried for thousands of years. We've solved crimes that went cold for decades. So why are these cases still unsolved? Because sometimes technology isn't enough. Sometimes the evidence disappears. Sometimes the witnesses are gone. And sometimes the clues only make the mystery even deeper. For decades, investigators have returned to these cases again and again, each time with better tools, better science, better technology. Yet every investigation ends the same way. No confession, no definitive answer. Just questions that refuse to disappear. Today we're counting down 5 of the most baffling unsolved mysteries ever recorded. A book no one can read, a skyjacker who vanished without a trace, a ghost ship found completely empty. Number 5, the book nobody can read. In 1912, a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich bought an old manuscript from a monastery near Rome. At first glance, it looked ordinary enough. Hundreds of handwritten pages, beautiful illustrations, a worn leather binding. But there was one problem. Nobody could read a single word of it. The text was written in a flowing, elegant script that didn't match any known language. Scientists later carbon dated the parchment to the early 1400s, proving it wasn't a modern hoax. Whatever this book says, someone wrote it more than 600 years ago and expected someone else to understand it. Inside are strange botanical drawings of plants that don't exist, star charts that don't match the night sky, and mysterious illustrations of women bathing in pools of green liquid. No one knows what any of it means. Over the years, some of the world's greatest cryptographers have tried to decipher the manuscript. Even expert codebreakers from the Second World War couldn't solve it. Neither could generations of linguists, historians, mathematicians, or modern computer scientists. Every few years, someone claims they've finally cracked the code. And every few years, other experts take a closer look, and the theory falls apart. More than a century after Wilfrid Voynich discovered it, the manuscript remains unread. Today, it's kept in a secure vault at Yale University. More than 600 years after it was written, the book is still keeping its secrets. Number 4, the hijacker who vanished into thin air. It was November 1971 when a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded a Northwest Orient flight wearing nothing more suspicious than a business suit and a calm expression. Shortly after takeoff, he quietly handed a flight attendant a note claiming he had a bomb. His demands were simple: $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes waiting when the plane landed. Remarkably, he got everything he asked for. After the passengers were released, the plane took off again toward Mexico. Somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, Cooper lowered the rear staircase of the Boeing 727, strapped on a parachute, took the ransom money, and jumped into a freezing rainstorm over miles of rugged wilderness. No one ever saw him again. The FBI spent more than 45 years investigating the case. They interviewed hundreds of people, examined more than 800 suspects, and chased countless theories, but none of them led to a definitive answer. Then, nearly a decade later, a young boy playing along a riverbank made an astonishing discovery. Buried in the sand was a decaying bundle of $20 bills. The serial numbers matched Cooper's ransom money exactly. To this day, that's the only confirmed piece of evidence ever recovered. No body was found, no parachute was recovered, and no one knows whether Dan Cooper survived the jump or disappeared forever into one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in FBI history. Number 3, the ship that sailed itself home. In December 1872, a British merchant ship spotted another vessel drifting aimlessly through the Atlantic Ocean near the Azores. The ship was called the Mary Celeste, and from a distance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Its sails were still raised, and although it had clearly been battered by rough weather, it remained afloat. But when the boarding party climbed aboard, they found something no one was prepared for. The ship was completely deserted. The captain was gone, his wife and young daughter were gone, every member of the crew had vanished without a trace, yet almost everything else was exactly where it should have been. There was enough food and fresh water to last for months. The crew's personal belongings were still in their cabins, and the valuable cargo was largely untouched. The only obvious thing missing was the ship's lifeboat. Even stranger, the captain's logbook ended several days before the Mary Celeste was discovered, suggesting the vessel had continued drifting across the ocean with no one aboard. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of piracy, and nothing to suggest a desperate struggle had taken place. Over the years, investigators and historians have proposed countless explanations. Some believed the crew feared an explosion caused by leaking alcohol fumes. Others suggested severe weather, rogue waves, mutiny, or even piracy. But every theory leaves important questions unanswered, and none can fully explain why an experienced captain would abandon a ship that was still capable of reaching port. More than 150 years later, the fate of the 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste remains unknown. What convinced them to step into a small lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic is still one of the greatest mysteries in maritime history. Number 2. The hikers who cut their way out of their own tent. February 1959. High in Russia's Ural Mountains, 9 experienced hikers pitched their tent on a remote, snow-covered slope. They were well prepared, familiar with brutal winter conditions, and expected to continue their journey the next morning. They never got the chance. Weeks later, when rescuers finally found the campsite, the first clue immediately stood out. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Not by rescuers. Not by animals. By the hikers themselves. It was as if something had terrified them so completely that escaping through the entrance wasn't fast enough. Even stranger, almost everything they needed to survive was still inside. Their heavy coats, their boots, their food, their equipment. Outside, a trail of footprints led away from the tent toward a nearby forest. Some of the hikers had fled wearing only socks. Others appeared to have been barefoot, despite temperatures close to -40 degrees. The first bodies were discovered beneath a large cedar tree beside the remains of a small fire. It looked as though they had tried to stay warm after leaving the camp. A few more were found scattered across the mountainside, as if they had been attempting to return to the tent before collapsing in the snow. Then the investigation took an even stranger turn. Months later, the remaining 4 hikers were found beneath deep snow in a nearby ravine. Several had suffered catastrophic internal injuries, including crushed ribs and fractured skulls. According to investigators, the force behind those injuries was comparable to the impact of a serious car crash. But there was almost no external damage. No wounds that seemed severe enough to explain injuries that extreme. One of the victims was also missing her tongue, although many forensic experts now believe that happened after death while the body lay beneath the snow. The official Soviet report blamed the tragedy on a vague, compelling natural force before quietly closing the case. It explained how the hikers died. It didn't explain why they fled. Over the decades, researchers have proposed dozens of theories: a slab avalanche, powerful wind effects, secret military testing. Some of those ideas explain parts of the evidence. None explains everything. More than 60 years later, one question still refuses to go away. What could have frightened 9 experienced hikers so badly that they abandoned the safety of their tent and ran into a deadly blizzard with almost nothing to protect them? Number 1. The man who was never supposed to exist. It was the morning of December 1st, 1948, when a well-dressed man was found lying against a seawall on Somerton Beach, just outside Adelaide, Australia. At first, it looked like a tragic but ordinary death. It wasn't. When police searched his pockets, they found no wallet, no identification, and nothing that revealed who he was. Then they noticed something even stranger. Every label had been carefully cut from his clothes, not torn off, cut off. It was as if someone had gone out of their way to erase every clue that could lead back to his identity. Investigators searched missing person records across Australia and beyond. His fingerprints matched no known records, and his dental records identified no one. For months, the mystery only grew deeper. The man seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Then came the discovery that transformed the case. Hidden inside a tiny secret pocket sewn into the waistband of his trousers was a tightly rolled scrap of paper. On it were just 2 words. Tamam shud. A Persian phrase meaning, "it is finished." Detectives eventually traced those words to the final page of a rare book of Persian poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Then, in an extraordinary twist, the exact copy with the missing page was found in the back seat of a stranger's car, parked only a short distance from where the man's body had been discovered. Inside the book was another mystery. Written lightly in pencil was a short sequence of capital letters that looked like a coded message. Cryptographers, intelligence experts, and amateur codebreakers all tried to decipher it. More than 70 years later, no one knows whether it's a code, a meaningless scribble, or the key to the entire case. For decades, the man became known simply as the Somerton Man. His identity remained one of Australia's greatest unsolved mysteries. Then in 2022, modern DNA analysis finally gave investigators an answer. The unknown man was identified as Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. But solving his identity didn't solve the mystery. We still don't know why he was on that beach. We still don't know how he died. And we still don't know what the message hidden inside that book was ever meant to say. Sometimes finding a name only creates more questions. And in the case of the Somerton Man, the biggest mysteries are still waiting for an answer.